In these times of uncertainty, it's all the more important that we keep collaborating, informing, and inspiring each other, so that we can be smarter and better tomorrow. Welcome to the Pakhuis de Zwijger livecast.
Hello everyone. On behalf of Pakhuis de Zwijger, welcome to the livecast about emerging stories. My name is Rut Kronenburg and I'm your host of today. This is already the 18th episode of Emerging Stories, the talk show about the future and the importance of independent journalism. Especially during these very uncertain and sometimes crazy times, access to reliable information is even more important than ever. In this series, we're going to dive into the different aspects of journalism. We're going to touch upon the problems and we try to come up with solutions. We do that with international guests like photographers, media experts, journalists, etc. They share with us their emerging stories and the importance of journalism. And this week, we're going to talk about LGBTQI and journalism. Is journalism still too hetero-normative? I will explore this topic with the guests of today. And in the studio, we have Haroon Ali. Welcome.
Thank you.
Haroon is a freelance journalist, writer and columnist. And via Zoom, we have with us Svetlana Kozlova, Russian journalist and editor. Svetlana, welcome. And we also have Yuri Kozarev later on in the studio. Haroon, you work as a freelance journalist here in the Netherlands for various Dutch media. What are the main topics you write about?
So I write about culture in the broadest sense. So LGBTQI issues is a very important issue to me because I'm gay myself. So I write a lot about gay rights, or LGBT rights in general, and culture in the broadest sense because, you know, that's also a topic that's very dear to me. My father is from Pakistan and my mom is Dutch. So even though I was born and raised in the Netherlands, I've always been interested in how different cultures respond to each other, how, for example, minorities in the West find their footing or the problems that they face. So I try to write a lot of stories about these topics and to interview people who are activists, for example, in these kinds of communities that may not have that kind of platform for themselves. I try to work them into the media that I write for. But, you know, I don't have one particular topic that I focus on. I'm interested in many different subjects, but let's say culture in the broadest sense, yeah.
Great. And how is it during this smart lockdown? Can you still perform your job?
Well, I mean, the first few months of the first lockdown we had in the Netherlands, working as a freelancer was tough. A lot of the magazines that I worked for, I did a lot of travel writing as well, and that stopped immediately. But also a lot of magazines went bankrupt in the first few months because they didn't have any advertising income.
Especially local newspapers.
Yeah,
yes.
and also since I'm traveling all over the world and writing stories about communities all over the world, it was hard to kind of have these stories published because, you know, I think what Corona created is that every country is really focusing on what's happening within in their own country, and people are still, I think, mostly interested in what's happening in basically in their own town, in their own city right now, and how, you know, Corona and the lockdowns affects their lives. So it's harder to, it was at least for the first half year, very hard to be able to publish other kinds of stories apart from Corona. It's changing now and people are, you know, getting more and more used to kind of the new normal that we live in. So they're also interested in reading other stories now. But, you know, that is a challenge as a journalist to, if you want to write about something else than Corona, you really have to work harder to get it published, I guess.
So that meant that you had less assignments? You know?
Yeah, in the beginning, for sure. And fortunately, I was writing also a lot of things about, you know, integration of different communities in the Netherlands, about, you know, freedom of sexuality, identity, religion. So these are topics that I'm writing about more and more now within the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Svetlana, how are you? You're in Prague at the moment, right?
Yes.
And the Czech Republic is, I think, even more red-colored than the Netherlands. So how's the situation at the moment?
It's not great. It's actually the numbers are pretty high. We're pretty much in complete lockdown. We have everything, have to be at home up before 9 unless you're walking the dog like 500 meters around your house. So it's pretty intense right now again, unfortunately.
Yeah. And you are originally a Russian journalist and now you're in Prague. Is there a reason that you are in Prague?
Many. Yes, many. I was a journalist in Russia back in the day, but then I moved to Prague. And right now I'm still a journalist and mostly editor with working with media in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. So I'm actually still very much in that region working with the people there on the ground. So physically I'm here, but my work definitely is more focused on the region.
Okay. And do you still also write about the topic LGBTQI and journalism?
Right. And as an editor in the Russian Linguistics Exchange, we work with the media in Eastern Europe. So myself being an editor and a producer of certain projects, definitely that's part of my interest. Generally underrepresented topics, transborder stories is something that I focus on. So essentially we would have maybe several media that make stories on the topic in their own countries, and then maybe we would combine them in a bigger story to see the issue across the border in a more regional scale.
Mm-hmm. And why did you want to become a journalist?
That's a good question. I was in school and I was pretty opinionated and curious, and I thought that journalism would be a venue to use those qualities, I think, to kind of look into the topics that interest me and, question authority, question the status quo. So I think that's why I wanted to be a journalist, and actually I still think that's what journalism should do.
Aha. Very good. Thank you both for sharing. In a bit, we're going to dive deeper into this subject. But first, we want to know what the people on the street are thinking about this topic. And our flying reporter confronted passers-by with the following question. Program makers should ensure that every group in the Netherlands is well represented in the media. For example, the poor, rich, foreigners, LGBTQ, etc. Is that the case? Let's have a look.
Ik vind het, om eerlijk te zijn, prima geregeld.
Wat ik vind is dat het heel erg in hokjes is gestopt. Dus er is wel heel veel, maar alleen dan voor dat groepje. En ik denk juist dat het goed is dat mensen een breder beeld krijgen. Dus dat het juist mixt. Dus dat je ook bij de mainstream programma's ook een veel breder beeld krijgt van de hele samenleving.
Ik vind dat we goed bezig zijn. Veel minder taboes. Veel meer variatie op de Nederlandse tv. Ik denk wel dat het steeds meer te vinden is op social media juist en op dingen als een Netflix, Videoland enzovoort. De Nederlandse tv vind ik nog een beetje saai. Ja, wordt het allemaal expres uitgelicht dat we nu iets speciaals gaan laten zien van een andere doelgroep. Maar dat hoeft niet, dat mag gewoon allemaal bij elkaar.
Ik heb wel het idee dat bepaalde zenders pro een bepaalde kant kiezen vaak. En het wordt dan toch wel altijd van één kant bekeken. Niet vaak van beide kanten.
Nou, het kan wel iets beter, denk ik. Nou, ik denk dat buitenlanders toch wel een beetje weinig in het nieuws komen. Tenminste alleen negatief. En dat is jammer, denk ik. Want daardoor zou het waarschijnlijk beter zijn om te integreren, nog meer.
Ik denk dat we goed bezig zijn op tv en op media en op alle social media platformen. Ik denk alleen dat bepaalde groepen wel iets meer aandacht mogen hebben. Bijvoorbeeld armen. Daar wordt nu programma's over gemaakt van rijk en arm. Dat ik denk van ja, die worden in de status gezegd van kijk, jij bent echt arm. Dat is niet nodig.
Nou, Ik had er eigenlijk niet zo heel erg op gelet, totdat er laatst een discussie kwam dat heel vaak de tafelgasten bij actualiteitenprogramma's, dat het een beetje een soort van eenheidsworst is. En toen ging ik erop letten en je mag wel wat meer diversiteit, ja.
Roen, what do you think of the comments of the Dutch public?
Well, I'm not surprised, but I'm pleasantly surprised that they actually think that, the media in the Netherlands are doing quite a good job in showing, different kinds of groups and stories. Especially in the last few years, and I think that's happening everywhere, especially on social media. People are attacking mainstream media for being, too biased, for, showcasing, the same faces over and over. I don't agree with that. I think that especially news talk shows are doing a very good job to try to invite not only famous people, but people from all kinds of walks of life. And I know this, my own partner, for example, he's a producer for Talkshow, so I know kind of the efforts they do to really show the entire population on TV. But, there is an interesting kind of battle going on between the world of social media and Twitter in particular, right, versus this, public television that's kind of an institute. And, if you look at Twitter every night after a talk show, everybody's always complaining that, one group is getting too much attention and that their own group is not getting enough attention. But I think if you look at media
it's
as a whole...
It's also typical Dutch,
yeah,
of course.
But it's also kind of the idea, which is a very toxic idea, I think, is that people are not, if I'm generalizing, a lot of people are not necessarily interested anymore in getting to know more about other groups. They just want to see their own group represented. And I think that's a very dangerous kind of mechanism now, so that when people watch TV, especially talk shows and news programs or TV shows about current affairs, they want to see their own vision, their own opinion, their own idea of the world represented on TV. And they're not necessarily interested anymore in hearing other perspectives or hearing other kinds of groups about that same topic. So in their eyes, you can't do it right anymore. You're always losing. So, and then people are just sticking to their own bubble, which is mostly on social media, like that one girl was saying. They find their own kind of niche with people who think and act just like them, and they feel validated. They feel that their opinions are validated by these people, which is a much more comfortable feeling than having your opinions challenged by other people, which I think is what public television in the Netherlands at least still is trying to do.
As much as possible.
As much as possible,
and
yeah.
Is it also valid for LGBTQI, or is that, to your opinion, different?
Well, I think if I just speak about the Netherlands, if you compare it to all the other countries in the world, we're doing quite well in representation of LGBT people in the media. So we hear a lot of stories about LGBT people on TV, in newspapers, magazines, documentaries in particular. And these stories are more and more told by people who belong to the communities themselves. So I do feel that, LGBT stories are being more and more told by the people who experience these problems themselves, which gives I think a very fair representation of the things that they're dealing with. But then again, you will also find, a lot of LGBT people who will attack these programs for being too one-sided or because it's not representative of their experience. So then they'll complain on, Twitter and Instagram, saying, for example, you will see a documentary about gay people, and then people will say, well, yes, it's about gay people, but there are not enough people of color in this documentary, so I don't feel that I can connect with this documentary. Or, for example, there are so many documentaries about gay people, but where is the trans representation in all of this, which is a very hot topic for the last few years. So again, you can't always please everyone, but I think that as a whole in the Netherlands, there is so much information available for LGBT people. So many stories are being told in an honest, sincere way, which I think we're very lucky here in the Netherlands.
So it's a fair representation,
I think so, yeah.
Svetlana, how is the situation in Russia?
Quite the opposite, I would say, unfortunately. I do think you're lucky. I'm sure there are ways to improve the situation in the Netherlands as well, but I wish that was the case for Russia. because it's definitely complicated. There's a question of the law, the existence of the law. It's called against propaganda of non-traditional sexual relations. It's a horrible law. It's ridiculous. It's really damaging for the representation because the media are maybe a bit more afraid to publish certain things because they're afraid that they will have to pay a fine or it will be blocked. And it's definitely an issue. Because, of course, we do have stories on LGBTQI people, but they tend to be quite negative. So if something truly horrible is happening, like 2 years ago, there were anti-gay purges in Chechnya, for instance, that made all the news. That's a horrible, horrible story that, of course, was reported by the media, but that's incredibly important story to tell, but that's not exactly a positive representation that LGBTQI people would love to see in the media. So there's definitely not enough positive stories. There's not enough positive representation.
But is it allowed to write about it, or is it not allowed?
The law is horrible in many ways, and one of the ways is how vague it is, because what is propaganda? You are allowed to, and propaganda of those non-traditional sexual relations for the minors. So you're allowed to write about it if you put 18 plus on it. So, but that's an issue that it could be losing some reach, like if it's on YouTube or in social media, that if it's 18 plus, it wouldn't get as much use. So you can write about it. The question is how and like how to market.
So you have
Generally,
to be.
there's definitely ways to go around it, but the issue is maybe not every media, especially smaller regional media, can have a lawyer to take a look at it and say, okay, this is okay, this is not, we will be okay if this happens, or we need to make a fact safe by this or that. So it's definitely discouraging the media of telling those stories, especially in a positive way.
Right. And does it also mean that journalists then perform a kind of a self-censorship on this topic?
I think so. I think that many do, unfortunately.
Right.
Because it's a hassle. Like it's something that would take you a little bit more effort and consideration and like thinking about the story than maybe another story that you could do.
Right.
So I think maybe some journalists get a little bit discouraged by the law, but also by sometimes like how complex the topic is, and if they're not very comfortable with it, that could also maybe discourage them completely.
And despite the law, I mean, what is the public opinion? Are the Russian people very open about it, or what is their point of view in general, of course?
Again, in general, it's obviously the people are different. Some people are more supportive, even with the stories. And don't get me wrong, there are stories that are getting published. There are journalists who are, doing the work and publishing those stories. It's not nearly enough, unfortunately. And even looking at the comments section, which is not always the best place to look, especially with the LGBTQ stories, you do have some really negative opinions, but you always have at least few positive and encouraging ones. If you look at the more like actual polling on the issue, most people have a neutral or negative view of LGBTQI people. I think younger people now getting a little bit more accepting.
More open?
Still, and it's, I think, a little bit more open.
Okay.
Thanks to, I think, just also social media, which
helps
it works
in
in
a
both
bit.
ways. It can spread a lot of hate, but it can also spread a lot of good stories as well.
Right, thanks. Haroon, you actually went to Pakistan.
Yeah.
Pakistan is
Whole different story.
A totally different, or maybe not. And you also you wrote a book about it, but you also made a short documentary.
I did, yeah.
Shall we have a look at
Sure, yeah.
Footage of it?
Er wordt dan aan mij gevraagd, waarom ben je niet getrouwd? Nou ja, ik val op mannen en heb een relatie met een man. Dat kan ik hier niet zeggen. Dat zou denk ik alleen maar een afstand creëren. Helemaal met mensen die ik eigenlijk dus bijna 20 jaar niet heb gezien. Ik lieg dus eigenlijk wel, ook tegen mezelf. En ga dus daarbij terug de kast in.
Ik ben Haroon Ali. Mijn moeder is Nederlands, mijn vader Pakistaans. Als kind ben ik wel eens in Pakistan geweest, maar de laatste keer was 18 jaar geleden. Ik reis daarom 2 maanden door mijn vergeten vaderland om het moderne leven te onderzoeken. Wie is deze knappe jongen toch? Dat was mijn humor destijds. De Islamitische Republiek komt vooral negatief in het nieuws. Ik ben benieuwd in hoeverre je hier jezelf kunt zijn. Tijdens mijn reis door Pakistan ontdek ik al snel dat er naast mijn geaardheid nog vele andere taboes zijn. En dat ik in gesprekken met vreemden beter mijn mond kan houden over gevoelige zaken. Vooral journalisten worden beperkt in hun vrijheid.
You cannot report against anything which is against the glory of Islam, against the armed forces, against the judiciary, against the friendly relations with friendly countries, and against anything which is against the morality and decency in Pakistan.
Die druk is overal voelbaar, zeker bij de beladen grensceremonie die ik bezoek. Indiase en Pakistaanse militairen spelen hier met veel bombarie hun rivaliteit na. Dit doen ze voor een uitzinnig en nationalistisch publiek aan weerszijden van de grens.
So you talk about the pressure that it's you can actually feel it.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so just to give a brief kind of backstory. So Pakistan is the country where my father is from, but I hadn't been there for 18 years. So I hadn't been there kind of as an adult, as an openly gay, westernized journalist. So, and that's kind of what I wanted to do, to discover the country as that person and to sort of see, you know, what kind of freedoms and limitations are there in, you know, modern 21st century Pakistan. And so I saw that, you know, a lot of topics are still taboo to discuss, you know, sexuality, religion, you know, the relationships with India, the neighboring country, any commentary on how the state is doing, how the army is behaving. So there's a lot of topics that are taboo officially, you know. So for example, there's a very famous law against blasphemy, which says you can't, you know, criticize or you can't insult the Islam or the Prophet Muhammad, you know, which is kind of, which makes, you know, it harder to write about it as a journalist or to discuss this at, you know, these topics at public events. But you do see that, you know, behind closed doors in people's houses or in, you know, kind of small meetings, there are a lot of, you know, open discussions about these topics. And you do see that a younger generation, women are choosing their own path. When you look at, you know, choosing their own partner or getting married, there are people who are discussing Islam. There are atheists who are trying to find like-minded people to discuss freedom of religion. And you do see that, you know, especially gay men and transgender women are trying to find each other and trying to find, you know, more freedom to be themselves in safety. And you do see that kind of happening in the bigger cities in Pakistan. There's a lot of interesting positive developments as well. But, you know, these laws, maybe just like in Russia, for example, you know, they kind of put like a blanket over everything where, you know, it's very tricky to be really outspoken and reach the larger public with these kinds of topics. But you do see it happening here and there in kind of covert ways. People are trying to tackle these issues. And of course, there's a very large diaspora of Pakistani people all over the world, mostly in English-speaking countries. And you do see writers and columnists and documentary makers trying to tackle these these taboo subjects, you know, and that's what I wanted to discover as well in a book that I wrote, which is just out in the Netherlands for people listening, which is called Half in the Netherlands. And this was a 2-part video I made for the Volkskrant, which is one of the national newspapers here, really trying to dive in these taboo topics and to sort of see like what are kind of the limitations you have.
Right. So behind closed doors, the people are much more open to these taboos. That's what you're saying, but the journalists are not hesitant to write about it.
I mean, it's just like you were saying. You know, they are writing about it, but they have to, you know, really think about it in advance. Like, how am I going to write about this topic? Which words can I use? Which word can't I use? You know, what is the context of the story that I'm telling? You know, am I, you know, and I think you recognize this as well. In a lot of countries where homosexuality is, for example, forbidden, you will find sneaky ways to still write about it. You know, you'll find little tricks to still tackle certain topics, but maybe hide it a little bit in another story, or find ways that are accepted to write about it. When people read it, they will recognize all these elements, but you know, the larger public may not. You know, and that happens in Pakistan as well. You know. Yeah. But it's a fine line. Yeah.
It's a fine line. Is it? Do you recognize this?
Of course, it's very different because in Russia, homosexuality, in general, homosexuality is not against the law. Yeah. It's the propaganda of it against the minors, whatever that means. But I think many things are still ring true, like the city versus more, well, not necessarily rural, but like this kind of a bubble of a capital city. Absolutely, and more kind of progressive people, especially behind closed doors. Because sometimes for me, it almost, when I visit, it almost feels very, free, because I mean, I am in a way from that bubble, like of people of like creative professions, people from big cities, et cetera, But if you go to more of an industrial city or a village, that would be a very, very different place. And I also wanted to ask, what's the official position in Pakistan? Is that there are no gay people in Pakistan, or is that because that's the position, let's say in Chechnya, in the Russian region, that there are no gay people, which obviously
not true. It's an interesting question, actually, because I was talking to a very famous gay activist in Pakistan, and he was saying that kind of the state's story they tell is, there is like 100,000 gay men in Pakistan, which of a population of over 200 million people, So really they're kind of acknowledging that they exist, but only in very small numbers. So you can still see it as kind of
it's not an issue.
Yeah, kind of, you're a degenerate, but it's a very small portion of the population. That was actually interesting. So for example, homosexuality is still, being punished in Pakistan, but the transgender community is a whole different story. If you look at the South Asian continent of Pakistan and India, trans women have been part of the culture for centuries. So they actually have a lot of legal protection now. They have a third gender on their passport. They have all these kinds of legal protections against discrimination, against violence. They should be able to do any profession they want. So if you look at trans people, Pakistan in a lot of ways is much more liberal than a lot of Western countries when it comes to trans rights. But homosexuality, on the other hand, is kind of being swept under, the Eastern rug. And especially if we talk about lesbian women in Pakistan, they're not acknowledged at all, because in a lot of Muslim countries, for you to acknowledge that lesbian women exist, you have to acknowledge the fact that women can have a great sex life that doesn't involve any man. And that's a very very hard idea to sell to Muslim men, the fact that they're not needed, So especially
that even touches upon their ego.
Yeah, even in my trip in Pakistan, it was very hard for me to meet lesbian women, because they're just ignored completely, like a lot of women still are there.
But that about the transgender is actually very interesting. We're going to talk about that later on a bit more. Because we're first going to the photographer of today, and that's Yuri Kozarev. We are having every week an international photographer to join us in the series and give their view on the future of journalism in the form of photos. Yuri actually started his career documenting the collapse of the Soviet Union during being the last empire of modern times. And he captured the rapid changes in the former Soviet Union. Yuri, welcome.
Thank you.
You sent us a lot of photos about the Arctic Ocean, and especially about the pollution of the Arctic Ocean. We're going to have a look at those photos in a minute, and maybe you can actually share with us why you took these pictures, why especially this one. First of all, I want to know, how are you?
I'm good. Pretty busy. It's not an easy time, but I found that it's very important. It's history.
And you're
try to get to the red zone, and whatever's happening, I try to travel. Lucky me, Russia is a huge country. We're still allowed to travel, so there are a lot of stories to cover.
Despite the corona, you mean you're allowed to travel? How is the corona?
Yes, it's still it's still doable. I still can travel around. It's pretty amazing.
And where are you at the moment, or is that difficult to share with us?
No, I'm in Moscow right now. But I spent a week at the red zone of one of the hospital a week ago.
Okay.
So it's pretty tough experience. When you actually go to the hospital, you realize how dangerous it is.
Exactly.
And how the doctors cope with this and how try to help people.
Was that for your work or was that for yourself?
Well, both. Just it's. I like a journalist. I think it's very important to tell this story.
Absolutely. And, yes.
It's not easy to get access. It's limited, but much depends on on the doctors you approach. So if they're brave enough, they let you in, and then you can tell the story.
Okay. Well, we're hoping to see those pictures also once, but now we're going to the Arctic Ocean. Can you please share with us what this is and what this series is about?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a picture taken in Norilsk. I started working on the Russian Arctic 4 years ago. And I found that it's a very important story of what is happening in Russian Arctic. And Norilsk is one of the main destination for my project. But what happened at the end of May there? It's huge disaster. So this is a picture of one of the factory, which was actually shut down 4 years ago, which is a good sign because some kind of relief, not so polluted anymore. But still, it's Norilsk is considered one of the most polluted places in the world. Mm-hmm. Just because the owner actually never cared about to do something better. Just it's all about to get profits.
Right.
So that inside of my melting factory of copper plant, it's like it's comparable with I don't know. It's really disaster. I just really hard to understand how people can breathe there, how do their hard work there.
Mm-hmm. Are there also a lot of sick people in that place?
Yeah, absolutely. it's really polluted. Just it's a lot of cases, cancer. Just pretty normal for them. They live with this. The history of the risk is pretty dramatic. It's been built in the 30s of last century when they found the nickel, palladium there, and it was built by prisoners, by Gulag. So a lot of people die there when they build up the town, when they build up the factories. But if we're talking about new modern Russia, it's supposed to be changed, but unfortunately nothing changed. Just they don't really care about
the health of the people.
Any changes. It's the last thing they think about. It's tough place anyway. It's pretty cold. It's polar night. Many aspects. But this is it's just fuel storage tank.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the reason of the last disaster. More than 17,000 oil poison, the soil, the rivers around Norilsk when it's spilled from this tank.
So the tank was leaking. Is that what you say?
It looks ugly. Sorry.
So
what happened. Almost 17,000 tons of fuel spilled from this tank at the end of May, and poisoned the soil, the rivers around.
Right.
The problem is,
yeah.
They knew that it's an old one, but they never actually tried to rebuild it. So absolutely irresponsible.
And have you published your photos? And did you get some impact with them?
Yeah, lucky me. There are still a few independent newspapers in Russia, and I found it's very important story to be published in Russia. So Novaya Gazeta is I worked with covering this environmental accident. With another journalist, Elena Kostюченko, we traveled there, and we knew it would be complicated for us from the beginning. We were detained many times by police.
Because the government doesn't want you to...
Svetlana already mentioned it's... sorry?
The government doesn't want you to report on this.
Absolutely. It was clear from the beginning. There was a pool of government...
we have a bad connection.
To be a huge challenge. We try to tell the real story and about the consequence of this disaster. And They prevented us from the beginning. On the first day when we arrived there, we were actually detained. So every time they create obstacles for us to move forward. Lucky us, we actually met brave people who made alarm about this disaster, and interesting fact that actually Putin found about this accident from social media.
Right.
Not from non-nickel people, not from the officials. And he was angry with this. And then there was an emergency situation. But still, that the goal of non-nickel, this company, was actually to hide, to cover up the consequence. For us, was the idea to understand how big the scale of this disaster. For this, you actually need to travel to travel along the river, go to the lake, try to meet the local.
Well, thank you.
Indigenous people. This lake is
The pictures are absolutely wonderful. So thank you very much for sharing them with us. And thank you for being so brave to actually take these pictures. And let's hope that the government actually will act upon it. Thank you, Yuri, for being with us. Then we go back to our topic, which is a totally different
story.
Totally different, so we have to shift our minds also. But Svetlana, you also made a documentary, a kind of a project it was actually, in Belarus, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Well, it was a documentary. But yeah, it was a kind of a pretty big project with media and journalists in 4 different countries: in Belarus, in Azerbaijan, in Moldova, and in Georgia. And that was actually one of my favorite projects. It has to do with LGBTQI people, and it's about how parents of LGBTQI people accept their children.
Right. We have actually a footage of it, so let's have a look.
А вот бороться с этим я буду, пока не лопну. А как бороться? Нужно просветить людей, они поймут, они все устаканится. Где вы видели мужика, который понимает ЛГБТ? Вот один, все. Тогда для этого надо очень сильно мир видеть, о нем думать, философом немножко быть. Для меня это великая высокая страсть. Что-то внести в понимание, национальное понимание. Ну, чтобы спасать этих малышей, потому что за них ответственность на нас лежит. Мы поняли? Они помирают от того, что мы все не понимаем. Мы поняли, обязаны всех просветить, чтобы их защитить. Чтобы они не оказывались в этом каменном мешке, никуда не повернешься.
Did it took you to find this man?
Well, not me. That's the Your Radio, our partner in Belarus. Really great independent media right now. Do you highly recommend them, especially now?
Especially nowadays, right?
Happening?
Yeah.
Especially, yes. They keep going, covering, making great stories. And I was basically I pitched the idea, and I was a producer of the project we did with 4 Media, and yes, that was not easy for the journalists to find the heroes for the stories, especially in some countries where there is really people are very reluctant to speak publicly. In the piece from Azerbaijan, we had to completely cover the voice, change the voice completely, cover
unrecognizable. Yeah.
Yes, because that would be definitely a potentially very dangerous, unpleasant situation for the person. But this, especially this guy, I loved him. He's just so genuine and so authentic. And what he was saying, I thought it was great because he was such a cool, older man who is really, really believes in LGBT rights, and that's amazing to see.
Absolutely, and you call him a lonely warrior. So he actually started he's now an activist in a way, or what? Why you call him a lonely warrior?
Because he's speaking about how he's trying to enlighten people, to explain what homosexuality means, how it works, etc. In Belarus, unfortunately, there's not a big movement for LGBT parents, parents of LGBT people. There's some great activists and NGOs, but they are younger LGBT people, feminists, and it's very different for the parents because own acceptance and acceptance by parents are they're tied together, but it's not the same. It sometimes can be even more difficult for the parents to really understand and to accept and to maybe try to do something about that.
So how long is the documentary? Is it already screened somewhere?
Right, but it's not a documentary film. There's a series of articles and videos from different countries that in the Russian language that we then also put together in a one piece that basically covers this topic in a regional scale. To go from what is it? How is it in Azerbaijan? How is it in Belarus? How is it in Moldova? How is it in Georgia? Because even though the culture and the situation is quite similar, but the situation is still very different.
Right.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I was wondering, so the laws against propaganda in Russia, do they affect the work that you do abroad? So in these other countries, is there kind of the long arm of the Russian state when it comes to the work that you do? Do they still check on what you do? Do they still, when you go back to Russia, ask you questions about it?
Me personally, I haven't had any serious dealings with the government, but also I'm lucky enough to have a name, Svetlana Kozlova, which is one of the most common first and last names in Russia. And generally, I'm trying to keep kind of, I used to work with activists a lot, so for them, definitely kind of keeping a bit of a, forward profile to be able to travel and meet with the activists on the ground. So it's definitely important. So, no, it's okay. At least as far as I know.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm sure they, maybe they keep track of the stories that in Russia at least make serious impact or cross to Russia from neighboring countries, but also vice versa. The Russian laws tend to, the horrible Russian laws tend to get, copy-pasted a lot. And not even in the neighboring countries, but sometimes, far away, which is very unfortunate.
Yeah.
So,
I see.
I mean, hopefully that will not happen in many countries because the law is ridiculous and horrible.
So did you get a kind of feedback on this project from people who watched it?
Yes, quite a lot of comments. This kind of topic that I considered controversial in the region about LGBT rights definitely gets a lot of comments, a lot of discussion. It's nice to see that almost every post would have some supportive comments, some more, some less, but it's definitely a mixed bag. Especially when people see the word children, even though the story is mostly about the children that are already grown up, and LGBT, in one sentence,
is a big step.
It gets a big reaction because,
but it opened up a discussion, and maybe that is also the role of the media. Would a project like that, would that be helpful here in the Netherlands? Haroon, what do you think?
You mean her project?
Well, kind of interviewing parents of LGBT children.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, because what you see in the Netherlands, you see a lot of LGBT people telling their own stories. But when you talk about LGBT acceptance in, more like immigrant communities, you do find that people from these communities often find it hard to tell their story because they're afraid of the response of their parents who still also live in the Netherlands. And if you want to talk about acceptance of those parents, they are often not as forthcoming as this very nice gentleman to tell their story in public. So
and even defend it, right?
Yeah. So I mean, it's also a topic that I'm looking into. Like, how can we make these parents more acceptive of the lifestyles of their children when it clashes with either the culture or the religion that they're from. But that's what I saw in. If I can make the link to my own project in Pakistan, is that often, a lot of parents will know that their son is gay or that their son is trans, for example, and they are sort of fine with it as long as you don't speak up about it. If you don't, go public with your story, or if you're gonna, for example, there's a lot of gay men who have relationships in Pakistan who might even live together, and sometimes their family, their parents might even know, but don't tell the rest of the family, don't tell the neighbors, those kinds of things are very tricky in, those kinds of cultures. And so everything is kind of okay as long as you don't, speak up about it. If I look at my own father, for example, I think he's not okay with me being gay, but I think he's more not okay with the fact that I'm so openly vocal about it. I think he would be fine with it as long as I would keep my sexuality to myself, or even marry to a woman to kind of please the rest of the family and shut up about it. But I'm not shutting up about it, and that's kind of often what pisses people off. And I think in a lot of countries outside of Western Europe, or basically Western Europe, is that they're kind of okay with you leading the lifestyle as long as you keep it to yourself. And that's what all these laws against propaganda are aimed towards. It's like you can be gay, but just keep quiet about it. Don't tell your story. Don't ask for rights or to, be left alone by the, so you all have to do it very hush-hush, quietly.
Secretly.
And I think that's not helping anything, because it's not going to go away. Yeah, it's very sad to see.
And what is the role of the media in this? Do you think the media can play a very important role in the acceptance of the community?
Well, I mean, I can't compare the Netherlands to Russia, for example. But, if I look at the story of this gentleman, I think it's super helpful, because here you see an older man who is from, that region telling, that he accepts his lesbian daughter, and, that he's actually, done research on it, read up on it, educated himself and challenged his own culture's misconceptions about gay people. And if other people of his generation see a film like this, they might actually think like, okay, maybe I was wrong, maybe I should change the way I think about things. Even if it's just a fraction of the people who will see this might actually change their mind. But, it's a start,
Right.
So we definitely need to see much more of these stories being told from, the region, not by foreign journalists who come and make a documentary about it, but, people who are from that area themselves.
Right. Svetlana, is this also some of the feedback that you received?
Yes, definitely. And I mean, for me personally, also as a lesbian woman, it was incredibly important to see stories that do show the real situations in the country, which are, not easy, that are difficult, but still show it through a positive lens of parents accepting their children. And I agree with Harun. I think all those laws against propaganda, all this, public pressure to keep things like quiet, hush hush, like it's okay to be gay as long as, you don't, like it's only like in your bedroom or whatever. I think that's because those kind of stories are powerful. Like the more this kind of stories you tell, the more accepting people become. And that's why it's important to tell them, to really show that there are good examples of, parents accepting their children, of, LGBTQ plus people, finding happiness and living like fulfilling, happy life. It's important.
Absolutely. What else can the media do to make it more acceptant?
Well, I think it's touching on what you say. You know, there's not just one story about gay people. There's different stories. There are people who are, for example, gay and very sexually free. I think those stories need to be told. That you know, gay people have, for example, in a lot of cases, different ways of looking at relationships and monogamy. I think those stories need to be told, and we need to kind of remove the stigma that anything sexually related to gay people is gross, is disgusting. You know, we need to, even in the Netherlands, sometimes I feel that if I write stories about gay sexuality, you kind of have to not be too explicit about it because you will alienate the mainstream readership. So I think those stories, we need to remove those taboos as well, that, you know, the sex life of gay people is just as valid as the sex life of straight people. But also, as well, show stories of people who are gay in a healthy, not necessarily healthy a monogamous relationship, but have a healthy, you know, love life, that they care about each other, that they build a life together, that they get married, adopt, or, you know, otherwise have children, you know. So I think it's important to show the diversity of this massive community, you know, because there's differences between gay men and lesbian women, between gay people and trans people, between white gay people and gay people of color. And I think if you show all these different stories, we're not just talking about the big LGBTQI group, we're showing humans in their individuality, that every person who's part of this LGBTQI community has their own unique story, and we just look for the humanity in it, you know, not necessarily the box that they're in.
Right. I think the media could play a different role, touching upon the different aspects of LGBT. I think we have to round up already.
It's up to you.
This is in my ear. It was a very interesting discussion. Svetlana, thank you so much for joining. I do have one last question for the both of you, actually. I ask all my guests the same question, so also to you. Where do you think that the media landscape, or how does it look like in 30 years, so in 2050? I'm going to ask you first. Sorry,
you go first, Svetlana.
Wow, that's an interesting question. I would say that I hope that in 30 years, media is definitely very diverse. Like, I would hope to see it telling all sorts of stories of people of different sexuality, identity, class, ethnicity, and to really, I would hope that there would not be a person that would look at, you know, see the media stories and not be able to find something that relates to them. That would be my hope. I don't know if that actually will happen in 30 years, or all of it will be underwater news because of of climate change. But I'm going to be an optimist and say diverse, maybe more, generally more personalized, more like hopefully more human.
More human. That's a nice one. Haroon?
Well, I mean, I was laughing because it's at this point, it's so hard to say where journalism will be 5 years from now, let alone even 30 years from now. But I think a lot of the debate about journalism in the last few years is about the emphasis on opinions over facts, you know, and even things that are facts are being discarded as fake news or opinions as well. So what I really hope is that there will always be an emphasis on reporting on facts in journalism, that we're reporting stories as they are, just presenting kind of what reality is, and then people can form their opinions about it. But I hope that journalism will always be a place where we report on facts and where facts always have the emphasis over opinions. And I am worried about that. I think, and it's everywhere in the world. You see that kind of, you know, slide towards, this circus of opinions. But I do hope that facts will always be facts.
Yeah. We actually had an episode on that. But there will be journalism and media in 30 years.
I hope so.
Okay. Well, the majority thinks there will be. So thank you very much for sharing. Svetlana, thank you very much for joining. Of course, next week we will be back. This was the 18th episode of the live cast about emerging stories. Thank you all for watching. Next week is about safety in journalism, because actually today is the Impunity Day. So next week we're going to talk about that important topic. Every day Pakhuis de Zwijger has live cast around different kind of topics. If you want to know what it's about, check their website for the program. I thank you for watching. Have a good evening and hope to see you next week. Bye.